guys, so I'm here to talk to you about things I wish were in more books, or things I would like in more books that I'm coming across. Obviously, I can't speak for all of the literature that is out there. There may be many books containing the things that I'm looking for in them, and I've just not managed to come across them. But I think as somebody who is quite immersed in the literary world, if I'm not seeing these things very often in what other people are talking about and what I'm looking for when I'm actively searching for recommendations online, it makes me think they're in less books than, say, like the alternative to whatever this is. This is not like a list of things, therefore, that I just look for in books. Like, I'm not going to say I want more Beauty and the Beast retellings, because I definitely think there's quite a few of those and I will continue to pick those up. However, these are things that I've maybe only read once or twice, or have had to like dig deep into the internet for, and would just love more recommendations of books that contain these things. And if they're not out there, would just love to see more books published with these things in them. And as is already probably self-evident, this is about things I want to see more of, not see less of. So I've tried to phrase them all as like positives rather than negatives in terms of like taking away or adding in. I think I'm making this more complicated than it needs to be. Let's just jump straight in and hopefully you guys will have some recommendations for me. First up, I thought I would go with a classic, and that is the Greek myth retelling. Now, of course, I'm not saying I need more Greek myth retellings. There are so many Greek myth retellings out there. I mean, there could never be enough. That's not a complaint by any means. I don't find myself struggling to find Greek myth retellings in general. I do, however, find myself struggling to find certain Greek myth retellings, and one in particular I really don't see done very often is Medusa. And I think the Medusa myth is such a fascinating myth because of actually how tragic a myth it is and how it's kind of survived into modern pop culture, where a lot of the original elements of the myth have been forgotten, and Medusa gets remembered as this monster who is then often, in addition to being a monster, heavily sexualized. Which is incredibly sad because her original story is actually a rape narrative. She is the victim of a sexual assault. It is not a happy story. However, I think it's one that has a lot of themes and issues within it that are very relevant to modern readers. So I would love to see more authors tackling this myth. If you are interested in a recommendation, I have read one called Hear the World Entire by Anwen Hayward, which I thought was brilliant. But like with any myth, I love to read multiple interpretations and reinventions of it, so I would love to see more of that. And I actually have this page on my blog that I know a lot of you have looked at. It's kind of like a database, I like to call it, where I collect together ancient Greek and Roman myth retellings in like modern literature, although like I do include, say, Shakespeare and things like that, but modern in terms of its relation to antiquity. And I keep a track of whether those books, you know, are like in series, whether they're for adults, young adults, children, whether they're queer, as well as a few other themes I've picked out, and what myths they retell. So you can go onto that page yourself, find out about all of the ancient myth retellings I am aware of, classical myth retellings specifically, which numbers over 100 at least in my list. And you can see what myths they retell if you're looking for a specific myth retelling. But I've noticed from collecting together those myth retellings that very few of them retell the story of Medusa. It is just very rare in comparison to some of the more popular ones. I mean, the Trojan War comes up a lot in different iterations, which probably isn't that surprising, but Medusa does not. And I would like to see more retellings of Medusa that kind of really tackle the heavy but important themes of that story, and also just kind of give Medusa a voice in kind of modern pop culture that isn't this one of this really sexualized monster. That's kind of what I'm looking for anyway. Something else I've been thinking about recently in my foray into historical romance, which has become a bit of a favourite genre. I've been really enjoying historical romance over the past year or so, but one thing I've noted is that 99% of the historical romances I come across and read are about the aristocracy, they're about the genteel classes, and I get that desire to kind of tell the stories of quite well-to-do people. It's very like luxurious lifestyles, and that's all very exciting. There's lots of balls, and I understand the appeal. I mean, a lot of our classic literature deals with the more genteel classes anyway, like Jane Austen. Even, you know, like the impoverished Jane Austen families are still not working class. However, I would love to read some historical romance novels about people who are, say, working class, perhaps about the servants or the people working in the factories or the people working on the farms, rather than the genteel classes. And I don't just mean a kind of like mixed background romance where the woman or the man is aristocratic and the other partner isn't. I would like to see one that is just a historical romance about ordinary kind of people in a historical setting. I mean, the 1800s is one of the more popular ones for the historical romance, so I'd really like to see a kind of 1800s working class romance, if that makes sense. Yeah, that's kind of something I've been thinking about looking out for recently and searching for recommendations of. On that topic, I would also love to see more female romances. Now, I've managed to find quite a few of those recently, which is wonderful because I've been doing like a deep dive over the past year in my search for like queer romances about two women, and it's been great. I found loads of good ones, but I still think they are few and far between, and they take a lot of work to find, if that makes sense. Like, they rarely just come up casually on lists of like best romances, for example. Particularly within the fantasy and the historical romance genres, which are my preferences, I would love more queer recommendations. I mean, I've found quite a few in terms of fantasy over the past year because I was really focusing on that, but I've found less in the historical romance genre, which again, I kind of get. I get that it's harder to maybe do a queer romance about two women because they're not going to end the story getting married, but you know, it's fiction and queer people were still always around, so it would be really nice to read that. I do have a couple on my TBR that I've heard really great things about. A Little Light Mischief by Cat Sebastian is the one I think I've heard a lot of people recommend that's on Scribd, and I really want to read. And I also read one recently that was like a romance meets Agatha Christie style murder mystery called Proper English, and that was set in the early 1900s, and I really enjoyed that. But it's something I'm definitely always on the hunt for. As you can probably tell, I've really been developing my specific tastes when it comes to romance, and something else I'd like to see more, not just in romance, I think in all literature, but I would like to see within romance and like fantasy, well, the genres I read, obviously I want to see it within the genres I read, and that is curvy main characters. Like, the number of romances in particular that I've read over the past year where the protagonist is described as having a flat stomach is just like really unrepresentative, I feel, of society, and I would just love to see some more curvy rep in all of the literature I'm reading, whether it be YA fantasy, whether it be historical romance, whether it be science fiction, whether it be Greek myth retellings. That's something I would love to see more in literature, and particularly positive representation of. I did recently read 9 Rules to Break When Romancing a Rape, which was a curvy protagonist historical romance novel, and The Queen of Yevlaria by Effie Calvin was a queer fantasy novel I read last year where one of the two protagonists was also curvy, and I don't know, it just makes me happy when the kind of diversity of shapes and sizes is represented in the literature I'm reading. So definitely on the lookout for that if you have any more recommendations. On my TBR is already Get a Life, Chloe Brown, which is a contemporary romance book that I recently picked up on your guys' recommendation, so I'm looking forward to that one. But I'd also like to see, and I feel like this was inspired by reading A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Brigid Kemmerer last year, and that's more disability rep when it comes to main characters in fantasy, whether it be YA or adult. So I'm not somebody that has a physical disability. I just thought A Curse So Dark and Lonely was such a wonderful book, and having seen myself represented in other ways in other books, I know how important that is, and therefore I would love to see and read more fantasy with main characters who have disabilities. I think I read a lot of fantasy, so that's one of the reasons I mentioned that genre, but I also think the fantasy genre often kind of creates these heroes, doesn't it? Your main character is this hero and she's out there doing amazing stuff, saving the day within whatever her abilities are, and I would love to see more disability rep there, like I mentioned, and I loved A Curse So Dark and Lonely where the character has cerebral palsy. So if you have more recommendations like that, then do let me know, and then obviously it would be wonderful if I could read some and recommend them to you guys. My next one I wouldn't necessarily say is like super duper rare. It's not. I've found so many books that fulfill this category, but it's one of literally my favourite things in literature, so I don't think I could have left it off this list of things I want more of, and that is sentient, clever, talking dragons. So I love dragons. I talk about dragons a lot. If a fantasy book has dragons in it, I'm 100% more likely to pick it up. But I have specific kind of interest when it comes to my dragons. I don't like dragons that are basically just animals that can maybe fly or breathe fire. I want them to be as intelligent, if not more intelligent, than the other characters in the book. In fact, if they could be like Tooth and Claw by Jo Walton, where all of the characters are dragons, that would be the best. If all of the characters were dragons, that would be even better. So if you know of any books where all of the characters are dragons, like Tooth and Claw, please let me know, because that's a book I want to read. But aside from that, I will accept dragons such as the ones in the Rainwild Chronicles, or in the Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini, or Heartstone, or Seraphina, or a whole host of other books that kind of tick my boxes when it comes to dragons. I am not as interested, however, in books like Game of Thrones. Those are not the dragons that I look for. Not to stray too far into the things I don't want in books, but just to demonstrate the difference, or say dragons like Smaug in The Hobbit. Like, I prefer my dragons to be central characters who have the potential at least to be good. I want them to be just like any other character in a book. I don't want them to just be like evil beasts, you know, they can be complex and so on and so forth. Some might be evil, some might not be evil, but I want good, talking, clever dragons. That's what I want. On that topic, something I didn't know I wanted until very recently when I saw it in a few books is good orcs. So I've noticed a couple of books recently that have good orcs in them, including Tom Holt's new book and a sort of fantasy queer romance between orcs that a lot of people have been talking about that comes out this year. I'll obviously link them down below. I can't remember the names off the top of my head. And I've also actually read a book with good orcs in it, which was Honour Among Orcs. I read that last year, and I just thought, I'd never really considered it until then, that orcs are obviously kind of these stand-in for bad guys in fantasy literature, or have been in the past, and I really like the concept of taking magical creatures that are almost exclusively represented as evil and making them more and more complex and giving them lead character roles. I just think that's so fun, and I kind of want more of that. So if you know of more like good orc books, let me know. And actually, one that I probably should have included earlier as part of my female-female romance request was, I just like more recommendations for queer fairy tale retellings. And I don't just mean female-female romances, I mean all sorts of different queer representation. I love reading these traditional fairy tales that kind of turn the narratives queer in a way they weren't necessarily before. I think that's always so much fun to read. And I've read some really excellent ones like The Raven and the Reindeer, Kissing the Witch, Ash. Those are the few that come to my mind immediately, but I know there's more out there, so do let me know. I have seen quite a few of those. It's not necessarily something that I couldn't find recommendations of for myself, but I feel like it just kind of went in with my earlier request. But before I wander into simply just telling you all the things I like in books territory, because that's not what this video is meant to be, I think I will cut it off there. Those are a few of the things that I don't feel like I see enough or find enough in books for my personal taste, and would therefore love to see more of. So if you have recommendations, let me know. And equally, while you're down there in the comment section, let me know what you want to see in more books. What is something you've maybe read once or twice, absolutely adored, and want to see more of? And maybe even I'll have a recommendation for you, if not other people who are watching this video. But until next time, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye guys!